when a lot of people ask me now, what should I do as an up and coming band? I'm like, be 100% honest with yourself. Be as sincere as you can with what it is you're creating. And if you're not losing yourself on stage, 100% of the time, you're doing a disservice not only to your music, but to yourself and to your fans. And, it's like Eminem sang in that song, you better lose yourself in the music the moment. Because it is that hour and a half to 2 hours that we're on stage every night is the greatest hour and a half to 2 hours of my day.
Hello, welcome to another episode of 2020. My name is Cory Peza here, as always, with Siobhán Cronin and Benny Goodman. What's up?
Don't forget to subscribe. That's what's up. I'm going to remind everybody here. 2020-D.
You were waiting for that one. Yeah. I know our listeners love that. That's their favorite thing in the comments. Is like, I guess they want us to subscribe. We do. We really do. We genuinely want you to subscribe. It's not just an empty,
operant conditioning.
That's exactly what it is. Super, super exciting episode today. We get to talk to so many cool people, and one of those cool people we talked to was Shannon Larkin. And Shannon has been so kind to introduce us to some of his friends and people that we never really thought would have a chance to talk to. And today we get to talk to Kevin Martin of Candlebox.
He was a lot of fun. I mean, I as someone that didn't ever listen to Candlebox before, it was amazing to hear his story and to go back and kind of rediscover some of the music that he wrote and hear a lot about how it happened.
Yeah. And as always, our part one with Kevin, we get to kind of dive back into his upbringing with music and how he got into it. And he's got a great story, with jazz influence and all this crazy shit. And then just kind of falling into being the singer of, one of the biggest grunge bands out there.
Reluctantly, as he puts it himself. But, without spoiling too much, let's just dive right into it. Part one with Kevin Martin of Candlebox right now. Please subscribe. So we're gonna jump right on in. We peer pressured our guest today into getting himself some whiskey because he doesn't know what he's strapped in for. My name is Benny Goodman. I'm here with my cohorts in crime, Cory Peza and Siobhán Cronin. But today, we have I've been meaning to talk to this guy for a long time because he doesn't know this. But I saw his single premiere live on MTV, and I went down to Tower Records and I said, "Can I get this Candlebox tape?" It was a cassette at the time, exactly. And they said, "Who the fuck is Candlebox, kid?" And I said, no, Candlebox. And this is the first time I'd ever experienced in my entire life going to a record store before something came out, because MTV made me love it so much that I asked before the people at the store even knew what it was. So, and by the way, my first rock shirt, and I have millions of them, was a Candlebox shirt because I was on one of my youth group outings to Newbury Comics, and while no one was looking, there was a picture of a middle finger that had been x-rayed, and it said "You," which was the song that got me into Candlebox, and I said I had to have that, and I went home to the disdain of my Jewish mother, and I knew that must be fucking rock and roll. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the lead singer of Candlebox, Kevin Martin.
Nice to have you here, Ben. That was an epic intro rant. He usually saves that for the end of the episode, so I apologize. Maybe he's blown his fuse already. But yeah, welcome.
I've waited 20 when was 93? I've waited a long time.
I stopped counting a long time ago.
22 years. Yeah, 20.
Okay.
25 years.
Yeah.
How are you, man? Getting good at math? I'm good. I'm alive. I just survived a house full of COVID, and I somehow managed not to get it. My wife and my son and all their friends, and I think it's strange out here in LA because we do have it's very limited with the restaurants, and you've got to wear masks everywhere and stuff. But we're kind of at that point, I think, where everybody else is like, listen, if I can I'm vaccinated, if I can get it and be done with it, let me get it and be done with it. But I didn't. Yeah. So
wow.
So I'll probably get it when I'm out on the road coming up in February, March, or the fucking stuff.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're sorry to hear that, and I'm glad that you're well, and I hope everyone else stays well or gets well. But
they're fine. They're fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for joining us on the show. We're super excited to talk to you. I did not grow up listening to Candlebox. However, I did for the first time over the last week. And it's really amazing to have you here. No, I mean, I'm being honest here. I'm the classical musician of the group. So
I actually hated you growing up. Now I'm being honest. Like, I thought, I was like, fuck those guys that listen to Candlebox. Let's listen to Bush.
But anyway, I'm really excited No, not at all. I mean, I just grew up in a different musical culture. I grew up in a house of classical music. So I learned something new from all the guests we have on the show, and super excited to have you here. So welcome. You got a good idea of our shenanigans so far.
I love it. I'm happy with it. It's exciting and fun. And, most podcasts that I do are like this. And I like that because it's casual conversation. And the history of my band, we're 30 years old now, and it still shocks me that people even want to have any kind of conversation with me about what I've done. So I'm happy to be here, and let's make it as off the cuff as we possibly can. So it's interesting.
I love that.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that from us. It'll be
excellent. It sounds like it.
Yeah, we call it going off the rails, and we do it several times per episode. So strap in. But I guess a good place to start, and the one kind of constant we do have on the show is like at least a little bit of kind of background, biological information for the people that aren't familiar with you and Candlebox, which for our listeners, I'm sure most people are, but there's just on the cliff notes of how you
biological, like how many chromosomes
biographical.
My
are you missing a chromosome?
Chromosomes. I'm not missing any. So I was born in Illinois. My father was a jazz musician, and my mother was a classical and standard singer. So I grew up in a household of music, and it was always something that I was able to go to at those times in my life. Those awkward moments when you're preteen, and then obviously when you become a teenager. Music was always that kind of escape for me. So I'm one of the lucky ones who's actually been able to have a career at it. My father took a job in Seattle when I was 14 years old, and that took me to obviously the mecca of the grunge movement, and it was mind-bending and eye-opening for me as a young 14-year-old kid. I'd grown up on punk rock music. My first concert was Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, and Butthole Surfers in San Antonio, Texas. So moving to Seattle,
that's pretty fucking rad, dude. That's sick.
So moving to Seattle and experiencing this kind of heavy, it wasn't metal, but I like to call it like an acid rock sort of thing, because everything was so slow and down-tuned, and certainly had everything to do with the amount of beer that everybody was drinking, but it was a great experience for me. So that's where I got my start, was in Seattle at the ripe old age of 14, and then I was playing drums in a couple punk bands, and then in 1990 a friend of mine asked me to sing on some demos. He was trying to make a record to get signed, and I was like, no, I'm a drummer. He's like, no, I've heard you sing at parties and shit, come sing on these demos. And that ended up becoming Candlebox, and I've been stuck with this job ever since. So that was 1991 was when we formed as Candlebox, and here I am 30 years later, still making a living at it, and I'm very fortunate. So that's kind of the cliff notes of who I am and how the band started.
That was a true Cliff Notes version. That I mean, some people could end the episode there. But no, go ahead, Cory. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's almost like someone's asked you that question before. It's like
it's never been asked. How'd you come up with the name Candlebox? Wikipedia. That's how.
One of the things you mentioned is moving to like that mecca in Seattle, and that's for someone my age, in my mid 30s, I just missed the grunge era, even though that's all I listened to once I was of age. But like to be in it at that point, can you take us back to what that was like to have an actual scene that was producing that kind of original music? Yeah,
I mean, it's still. I think to this day it's the last kind of movement of real rock and roll that we're going to see ever. There's just an honesty to it. I think for me, it was the experience of being a 14, 15-year-old kid and watching these incredible musicians play music that were, 19, 20, 21 years old, with no real regard for their safety, and no real regard for the industry, for that matter. I mean, it was bands that were making music the way they wanted to make music. I used to rehearse next door to Alice in Chains at the Music Bank, which is their box set that they released. It was an actual rehearsal studio, and I was playing drums in this kind of Roxy Music type of a band, which was amazing to me that somebody in Seattle thought that would work. But I love Roxy Music, and I was like, sure, I'd like to play some pop music, whatever. I'd been playing punk forever. So, and Sean Kinney used to come over and be like, hey man, you guys sticks? You guys sticks? Hey man, you guys sticks? And I'm like, yeah, I've got sticks. And that's the extent of my relationship with Sean Kinney. But at the same time is when I met Layne, and we became very, very close friends. So my connection to the Seattle music scene was made, purely by being in the right place at the right time, and watching these bands develop their sound and the creative nature of what they were doing. I mean, also next door to us was also a band called Catbutt, which was this amazingly cool punk rock.
Catbutt,
like a cat butt. And,
okay, that's what I thought.
The predecessors to the Butthole Surfers.
Yeah, so and that was they were playing this kind of amazing dirgy punk rock. So being around this scene and listening to these bands play kind of really inspired me to kind of be better as a musician. I didn't think I was going to become a singer in a rock band because it wasn't really what I wanted to do. Being a drummer was what I wanted to stick to. When I first moved to Seattle, I saw Cornell playing drums for Soundgarden. They were a three-piece, and Chris was the drummer. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do anything, I'll be a backup singer, and I'll be playing drums, and I'll carry the harmonies and that sort of thing. So that was also inspiring. But watching,
did you sing Beth in the middle of the set? Like, did you stop and sing Beth? Was that the dream? No. Kiss style? Like, because that's why I want to play drums. No,
I never wanted to be a singer in a rock band.
I guess that's why I just listened to Zeppelin instead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
I mean, Robert Plant, I don't think he plays guitar, maybe a little bit, but I don't think he really does anything else. But it was just an inspiring movement. And of course there was the dark side of the scene as well. There was a lot of heroin and a lot of drugs. I somehow managed to stay away from that. I guess maybe it was because I was a lot younger. I was 5 years in age younger than most of these musicians, and I wasn't hanging out at the parties where a lot of the stuff is going on. So I'm one of the lucky ones, but yeah, it was an awe-inspiring experience as a young kid to be in such a climate that had, 15 of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time have come from Seattle, and there's probably more. There are bands that people don't even know about that were around long before Soundgarden or Alice in Chains or Pearl Jam, of course, or Mookie Blaylock or Mother Love Bone or Green River or Mudhoney or any of that stuff. But they're just and of course Sub Pop Records had everything to do with the great success of the city. They were so supportive of the local scene. Candlebox is always kind of the redheaded stepchild of Seattle. So we were a lot younger in age. A lot of people didn't know who we were. They thought we moved there to get signed. There were a couple bands that actually did do that. But we just were kids. I think when all of the magic was happening, and there are so many shows that I didn't get to see because I was underage. And Seattle was a city of up until I think maybe 2000, where you had to be 21 years old to go into a bar to see a band, or to actually play in a band. You had to be 21 years old if the band was playing in a bar. So it was difficult as 17, 18, 19-year-old kids forming bands to kind of be included in that environment, or included in that kind of crew. The varsity football team, if you will. We were JV, and they were all varsity, but it was pretty spectacular, man. And of course, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about how lucky I am that my dad took that job up there, and somebody asked me to sing on some demos, because Candlebox has been paying my rent for 30 years, and I'm so grateful.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's interesting to hear your perspective of Seattle, because I've always wondered what it was about the city or that time in the city, why it fostered so many amazing groups and musicians. And so you mentioned it was sort of the record label. Was there anything else about the city at the time that made it so conducive to all these people kind of rising up in this era of music?
Well, it was very small. it was, Seattle's at the time, it was a town called city. Now it's a massive, metropolis, which is insane. But, I think when I moved there may have been maybe 1 million people that lived in Seattle proper, maybe. I would maybe even say 600,000. So it was a really, really small city. And music was kind of, because it rained all the time and because there was a creative nature to the city, you're not really outside running around, on a skateboard or playing basketball. You're in your basement with your guitar and a couple beers or whatever your drug of choice is and making music. And we had some great radio stations. We had a local station called KJET, which was an AM radio station, which had some of the most amazing DJs and music that you could imagine coming across. There was also KSW, which was the rock station, which is still around. They had a locals only show on Sundays. They played between, I think it was 8 p.m. and midnight. They played every local band the city had to offer, even locals from Oregon, locals from Tacoma, which was south of Seattle, bands from Everett, bands from Bellingham, Washington, bands from Eastern Washington. So it really was about supporting that Northwest music scene. And all those band guys, because the city was so small, at one point or another, they all were in a band together. It was the most incestuous music scene that birthed off some of the most amazingly incestual rock bands. It's really bizarre that all of those guys that are older than me, that from those great, not even just hugely successful bands, but successful rock bands, they all at one point or another played with Chris or Ben or Hero or Kim or Matt or Jeff or Stone or Mark Arm or Matt Cameron. They all, Andy was in, Andy Wood was in, I think 5 or 6 different bands, and also a couple of the guys came from a little island called Bremerton in Bainbridge, which was just across the water from the city. So, when the chance came for them to leave the island and move into the city to play music, they all did it. So, and they all lived together. Chris and Andy were roommates for a long, long time. Stone, I think Stone was roommates with Regan Hagar, who was playing in Malfunction with Andy. So, I think you find that common thread between musicians and it kind of keeps you in the mix, if you will.
Sure. Going back a little bit to your not to interrupt you, Ben. Go ahead.
He just downloaded a bunch of stuff, and I understand, Siobhán, that was not your time, but that was my time. So people know, like Stone Gossard, again, for example, he's just doing out Pearl Jam, and then Chris, he's saying just casually, Chris Cornell, like arguably one of the greatest singers of all time. And I'm not going to let you walk past this. I don't know how Siobhán and Cory don't know, but you're like, oh yeah. So, Sean Kinney, one of the greatest drummers, again, from Alice in Chains, love him, like plays crazy ass weird beats, comes over and says, oh man, can I get some sticks? But then you become friends with Layne. Now, first off, I want you to understand that growing up, I just told you, I broke this out at the beginning of the show. One of the first bands that I ever that made me like hard music was Candlebox. And in fact, I got into Alice in Chains after Candlebox. Wow. But when I got into Alice in Chains, I was like, this guy can fucking sing. And I also had no idea that Jerry Cantrell was kind of like that voice together, because you don't realize, and that's first off why I think William Duvall sounds so great in the band, is because Jerry Cantrell was so much of that, what as a child, not understanding how the production was, that right. was part of the voice. But you met Layne, and you later became one of my favorite singers from the greatest city of rock and roll. What were you guys talking about? How did he influence? Paint me a picture, bro. These guys just want to talk about later, and you're like, I want to know. You're hanging out with Layne and Sean. What the fuck was going through your mind? You guys smoking, hanging? What was that like?
Well, I was a lot younger. So my relationship my relationship with Layne was, predominantly either at the rehearsal studio or at if I went over to a friend's, house for a party and Layne happened to stop by. Most of the musicians lived on either Queen Anne, which is the hill that's kind of against the backdrop of the Space Needle. That's Queen Anne. So a lot of the musicians hung out at a lot of parties up there. My apartment was downtown on First Avenue, and I was working at a shoe store called Fluvog with Susan Silver. and Susan was managing Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, dating Chris at the time. So that's how kind of the relationship continued, was because the guys would come into the store for their flyers. Back in the day, Seattle allowed you to tag the telephone poles with your show flyers. They actually still do it. They haven't switched over to the whole metal pole thing, so it's still got that 17 years, 25 years worth of paper stuck on it. But so that's how a lot of the relationship would be, that the guys would come in and hang out, and then because there's not a lot to do during the middle of the day in Seattle back then, so they would come hang out in the shoe store. We'd listen to music, talk about music. They'd pick up their flyers. Layne would be like, "Hey, there's a party at Johnny's tonight, or on Friday. You and Melanie should come up and hang out at Jeff's place, or whatever." So I was lucky, being that I was 16 years old, that they were including me in a kind of their world. But
are we talking Jeff Ament, the bass player from Pearl Jam?
Yeah.
All right,
Jeff's
just so I can let
Queen.
people know, like, I'm trying to hold on to the consciousness of this cool fantasy you're painting. Continue.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is it was, at the time it was very casual. The city was, none of the bands had any attitude. They weren't walking around like they were the baddest motherfuckers in the city. It was just, they were supportive and enjoyed one another's company musically and one another's bands. I mean, Chris was always wearing, a local band's t-shirt on stage. So that kind of relationship that started at the Music Bank rehearsal studios just kind of devolved into conversations about bands, music, what you were listening to, what punk rock bands had inspired you. I mean, they were mostly interested in the fact that my first concert was Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, and Butthole Surfers. That's like I think for them, they're like, how old are you? I was like 12 years old. That was my first concert. Where a lot of these guys, their first concert was like Sabbath or Kiss or Aerosmith or something like that, because being that they were born in like 1964 or 63 or 65, and I was a 1969 kid. So really the extent of our relationship was just conversations about music. I didn't have, hey man, what you doing? How's your day going? I'm going to pop over and have a beer. I didn't have that relationship. It was very much, run into one another either at the rehearsal studios or at the shoe store or Pike Place Market having lunch or something like that. Jeff Ament was a bike messenger for a long, long time, and I almost ran him over in my car, one time. So that's kind of how the city was. I mean, it was just, you would see these musicians everywhere, and that's kind of how cool it was.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, what a different time. I've been to Seattle since, but yeah, as you've said, it's a metropolis.
Well,
it's a totally
really
different
cool
place.
That 5 years made the difference of, like, you were doing the heroin with them because you were hanging out at the 21 plus clubs, or you're just the younger brother. They're like, oh, we can't give him those drugs, but like, hey, keep it up, little Kev. You'll be good one of these days. But 5 years is the difference between, like, the Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains guys, getting fucked over there, and then the redheaded stepchild being born that was Candlebox, that is Candlebox in Seattle. And it's such a crazy time because, honestly, the only other place that I kind of feel like in my lifetime that's happened has been Boston, where I'm from, in the sense that there was a period of time, obviously back in the day with bands like Boston and Aerosmith and Jay Giles' band, but there was a period even slightly after you guys, like, obviously our commonality is Shannon Larkin, and he's not really a Boston guy because he joined Godsmack way later, but Godsmack is one of the biggest heavy rock bands, on the planet. And then obviously I don't want to say Stain because now that guy kind of annoys me, but but still, Stain was a huge fucking band, and there was a lot of bands from Boston. So when Cory and I were growing up, there was a scene, and we just thought, like, hey man, like, there's just 50 bands on in a night, and people just showed up, and the scene was on, and it's like we got to watch it all fall apart. Do you feel that happened with Seattle, where you like saw like the whole high rise of this comment, and then all of a sudden people just stopped caring?
Yeah, I think that, that's exactly what happened. The interesting thing, your conversation about Boston and my love for Boston, like the band, the Cars is like one of my favorite bands of all time, as are the Pixies. But, Damone is one of my favorite bands from Boston. I don't know if you know them, but I love them to death. And so I agree with you on that. I think that there was one other city, Chicago, that was developing a very similar music scene. And what happens is
Pumpkins,
of
Local
course,
H. There's a lot of good,
Yeah.
really good music. Yeah. I love the
Yeah, and
Local
that's-
H guys. A lot of people don't know how awesome Local
they're
H.
great.
If you're from
Yeah.
Chicago, 2-piece band, by the way, that fucking sounds like Rush times Primus.
Yeah, long before anybody was on before the White Stripes. But yeah, so what happens with those music scenes is it is that the supernova effect. It burns so bright that when the media gets a hold of it, or the New York Times or Vogue magazine or whatever, and starts to kind of try to make it famous with a title like grunge, or these designers are starting to make $700 flannel shirts. It burns that star out really bright. But the beauty of what happened in Seattle was that Sub Pop Records stayed around and continued to sign great bands, continues to this day.
Can we just
to
let
sign
people
amazing
know
bands.
Sub Pop was Nirvana for people that didn't realize that
Yeah.
Bleach that was made for $600, as it states clearly on the back of the vinyl or the record or the cassette, whatever that you had. The vinyl and record are synonymous. It was Sub Pop Records, and it was a very famous label that you saw bands wearing a lot. But again, Siobhán, she's used to Gen Pop, not Sub Pop.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Sub Pop was what, not Gen Pop. What meant you were
I
in
know.
Nirvana. You're in Nirvana if you're on Sub Pop. Or Soundgarden.
I'm not that unplugged. I know about this.
Nirvana
Yeah, so-
Unplugged's a great record, but not on
Yeah.
a Sub Pop. It was on Geffen at that moment.
Yeah, Sub Pop was brilliant, and they put so many great albums out, and they still do. Like I said, I don't know if you guys know the Head and the Heart. They're a Sub Pop band. They're from Seattle. Band of Horses was initially on Sub Pop. This is a label that to this day still puts out some of the most amazing music and is still locally owned. It is still owned by Jonathan Poneman, and it's still local in Seattle. And so although that supernova burned out and the people's attention left that kind of the focal point of the city, and I think it really probably ended with the presidents of the United States with their kind of quirky pop records. That's when people stopped really looking at Seattle. And of course, then you also had that kind of metal, I don't know what you call Korn and those types of bands, but that was just really starting to.
Hold on, can I ask you? Were you ever in a Starbucks and like all of a sudden like peaches and peaches for free, peaches,
Yeah, all
and
the
you're
time.
like, this is what my scene has devolved to.
Well, no, but it wasn't. Listen, there was nothing
There's not
wrong
even
with it.
6 strings on a guitar, man. He only uses like 3.
Yeah, they
I'm
were
just
a
saying I
great
love them.
band. But that was a sad thing. It was like that was really, in my opinion, kind of the nail on the coffin of Seattle. And at that point, people weren't taking the bands that were coming out of the city serious. And I think that's why the presidents were successful, is because people were looking for something different. They had been, for about 6 years, from 1989 to 95. Beat over the head with this kind of dark, melodic, sinister rock and roll, and of course with the great success of Alice with Dirt, and Soundgarden with Super Unknown, and Pearl Jam 10, and Nirvana's Nevermind. Those successful albums were instrumental in the death of the city because they were so successful. And I think that that's what happens. It's not really the attention from the outside. It's the fact that you have such great success that people start to dislike you and they don't want to pay attention to you. It's not the band they dislike. They're just like, fuck Seattle, I'm over it. 10 million records again. Like, why do we need to sell 10 million albums? But that's kind of what happened.
Interesting. I want to go back and fill in some of the gaps for the people like me. And I want to hear a little bit about your early exposure to music, some of your early influences, and how you developed. You said you were a drummer. How did you gravitate towards the drums? Like, how did you get involved in music? And at what point did you decide that's what you wanted to do?
Well, I was very young. I'm the youngest of 4. My older sister, she played flute. My brother Dennis played saxophone. My brother Brian played saxophone, and I think mainly because my father was a jazz musician who played all the woodwinds. So I think it was part of the family was, we had that innate ability to play kind of that instrument when you have two musical parents and it's always around you. So you kind of go, oh, you played saxophone, so I should play saxophone. Well, I picked up the French horn at the age of 6, which, you know, it was the size of me, and dragging that thing around, you know, to my kindergarten and first grade was pretty hilarious. But yeah, I joined the school band in first grade, thinking that everybody does that. That doesn't even exist anymore. You know?
Right. I was going to say that's pretty amazing, because now it's like you have to wait until high school or there's no music program. So that's incredible that you had that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of, well, I grew up in Kansas. I should kind of go back and say, you know, being born in Chicago, ending up in San Antonio, and then moving to Seattle when I'm 14. There's a lot of life in the middle there that I haven't really touched on, and that's basically that my dad was a regional sales manager for a salt company, so we were constantly moving through the Midwest. But in the Midwest, music was really, and art was still very, very instrumental and a part of every single school that I attended, from first grade till, you know, when we were in Kansas, my sister she was a junior. So, I mean, yeah, I was, you know, all the way through high school. So the fact that I was able to have that instrument at such a young age and learn how to play it, my dad was, you know, great with it. He's like, well, this is, you know, kind of how you do it, and showed me how to, you know, so by second grade, I was first chair French horn player. And that's kind of funny, because I was like 9 years old or some shit, or 8 years old, or whatever the hell it is. But yeah, I mean, and then so it just kind of, as that progressed, by the time I was in sixth grade, I was playing clarinet and flute. And then I moved to Texas, my beginning of my 8th grade year. And that's where I found the drums. And it was really just because I didn't know anybody. I was a brand new school. Texas was, you know, I'd come from this small Midwest lifestyle of a high school that had maybe, you know, 150 graduating kids. And you know, there were 7 to 10 to 12 kids in my class, to 32 kids, you know, with 5 different math teachers and 5 different science teachers. My middle school, when I moved to San Antonio, had 2,200 students. And so for me, not knowing anybody, I asked my mom for a drum set, because I had just recently started listening to Rush because of my older brother. And so I was really enamored by the way Neil Peart played drums. So I basically got a drum set and tried to emulate that. And at the same time, I was also listening to a lot of punk rock, because my sister, who I had mentioned the Cars earlier, her favorite bands were Blondie, the Cars, the Clash, kind of that New York punk rock scene, Ramones. So I was going between the two different styles on the drums, and it taught me a lot about music and the fact that I was skipping around, I guess, genres. It inspired me to be a better listener to music. So I listened to, you know, when I was, 12 years old, I was listening to everything. I was listening to...
Can I ask a question as a plebeian? So
sure.
If you're a new forming musician, you're playing the drums, your mom hooked you up, she's awesome, good job, Mom, winning, fucking, I love hearing that. Mom, can you get me drums? She buys you the drums. You're listening to the Dead Kennedys, and you're listening to Rush, okay? And we obviously know, like, the Professor over here, where it's like, you know, hyperspace, and, you know, the CERN super collider, and then we have, like, Four on the Floor, maybe, if you're not throwing something at G.G. Allen's head. Well, okay,
no,
so now this is what I want you
to...
This is why I want you to tell me. What did we take, skipping around genres, as a newbie drummer, from the Professor versus the Dead Kennedy? Like, what are they teaching me that the Professor isn't, and vice versa?
Well, the Professor is the Professor. It's mathematical, and so as a drummer, the mathematics of, you know, a 7/8 signature or a 9/16 signature, or these types of things that you're learning to play in, are integral to who you become as a musician, because you're learning rhythms, you're learning patterns, you're learning time signatures that most people don't bother to try and figure out or even want to live in. Most people want to live in a 4 on the floor, 4/4 basic rock and roll beat, because that's kind of what pop music was in the 50s and the 60s. Elvis, of course, was all of that, you know. But the Dead Kennedys, what I learned, what I brought, or what I took from what I was learning from both these sides of music, was the passion and the aggressiveness and the distrust of government. And what I loved about the study of both of these musicians and learning to play all these different types of music. I also learned to play almost every single Kiss song there was,
But didn't sing
the cars.
Beth. But you didn't sing
No, I didn't sing that. But it taught me how to. I can be a serious musician, and I can understand the mathematic element of it, but it's all heart, and that's what both of those musicians taught me. Both drummers was that the passion for what you play, even if it's imperfect, is perfect because that's who you are, and those imperfections are what make us all, who we are, who we are living and breathing. We're none of us are a perfect being. Even Neil wasn't perfect. I mean, when we toured with Rush, I don't know if you know that, we actually, for an end of tour gift, we gave Neil Peart a right-handed catcher's mitt because every time he'd throw the stick, 1 of 9 times he would drop it. So he was so good at grabbing the new stick that it looked like he caught it. So we got him a right-handed catcher's mitt for his for our thank you gift for him.
Nice.
That's amazing.
That's great.
Let me ask
So
you, did you have any?
He wasn't perfect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a wonderful statement. It's amazing to hear some of your background. And I wanted to ask, did having a jazz musician in the house influence you at all? Did you take anything from jazz playing? Because when I think of drummers and I see jazz drumming, that's some of the most complicated shit I've ever watched.
Did Buddy tell you to just give up because you'll never be as good as him?
Yeah, I would have loved to have met Buddy Rich. I did. I love jazz music. I still.
He wouldn't want to have met you. He'll tell you that.
No, he was an evil.
You suck.
Evil human being. Yeah, he was a mean son of a bitch. My father actually jammed with him. My dad was born in 1922. My mom was born in 1940.
Shit.
So my parents were 18 years apart. But my dad had played with Charlie Bird Parker, Dizzy Gillespie,
Wow.
Buddy Rich, a lot of those cats, because Chicago was the mecca of jazz.
That's where it was at. Yeah,
That's
man.
awesome.
Yeah. So my dad jammed with all those guys. So those stories were kind of what inspired me to learn about jazz music. So yes, I did listen to jazz a lot. I still do. I love Miles Davis. I love John Coltrane and Charlie Bird Parker and a lot of that influence of jazz. I have a friend who makes fun of me when he comes over sometimes because he's like, oh, he does all that pointing stuff to me, and I'm like, not all jazz musicians are like that, but there is an inside
Just
joke
the cool
about,
ones.
They're the only ones who know that a 17/24 time signature, so and that doesn't even exist, but I threw it out there like it does. And that's what jazz is.
Siobhán, he just pulled
jazz.
to me. That's what I do. I make up things that aren't even real. I'm like, that's a G17 chord. And Siobhán's like, I know that's fucked.
There is
it's
a G17 chord somewhere.
Somewhere in the universe.
In jazz.
No, it's interesting because
Exactly.
jazz is something that started to fascinate me later in life, and I was classically trained, but it's always interesting to hear because I feel like I learned so much from it. So it seems like you would have incorporated some of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I do, as a singer, like I mentioned earlier, being stuck with this job, I consider myself the reluctant lead singer of Candlebox. But what I do is when I make records, I pull from my catalog, if you will, or my library of the things that I grew up listening to. My favorite singer of all time is Otis Redding. And so I find that I will sing or I will move through melody or lyric a lot of times the way a jazz drummer would move through a standard chord progression. And that's because I was so influenced by so many different types of music, but because my dad loved jazz so much and it was on for me from such a young age, every day I come home from school, if my dad was home, there was some jazz record on, and I love that, and if my dad wasn't home, because he was out on, a week's sales trip or something, my mom was listening to the standards or we listened to a lot of classical music and a lot of ABBA. My mom loved ABBA. So I pull from all that stuff, and I love.
So let me ask you this. I grew up listening to, like, let's say Far Behind. I mean, that's a song that's so ubiquitous. It's still, like, it's everywhere. It's like literally, I hear it all. I love that song.
Thank you.
It's a song of my life. Where is These Arms of Mine in Far Behind? Where's Otis floating around in that? Like, what can I hear now when I go back and put on my nice headphones brought to you by Dre Beats and go back and listen to it and close my eyes and go, Oh, okay, I got that because I love hearing that, like, you know, because I've been listening to that song for so long, and I love.
Well, you won't hear Otis per se. Like, you know, I've been loving you. You won't hear that, but you'll hear the patience in the way Otis Redding approached songs, and you know, the Respect song that he wrote for Aretha Franklin before, you know, she kind of added that RESPECT part. There's great patience in his approach towards songwriting. There's great patience in his approach toward lyric. It's very simple. It's to the point. It's from the heart, and that's where you'll find Otis in that. You know, I've always kind of considered myself to be a basic songwriter. I would never put myself in the category of like a Chris Cornell as a songwriter or you know, let's say Steely Dan or something like that. I don't have that technical mind to write that way. I have the Otis Redding mind, which is R&B from the 50s and 60s was so heartfelt and so passionate and so great struggle with R&B singers from the 50s and the 60s. And I think that that's what I'm drawn to. And that's why, you know, I wrote Far Behind about Andy Wood. It's from the perspective of the drug. It's not me singing, hey, Andy, and I didn't mean to treat you bad. It's the heroin. That's what Andy chose. And I wanted to pay my respects to this musician that had inspired me. So I used my love for Otis Redding to tell that story for Andy Wood, and I did it in the way that I thought Otis Redding would do it.
Wow, that's incredible.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, no, it does.
It does. I'm just absorbing that. You know, that's first off, that's incredible, and I have to tell you, it really is a thrill for me so many years later because, you know, we meet so many people and we do this show a lot. I mean, and getting to be friends with people, and you know, like I could call Shannon my friend, and it's just like it's strange for me. But like, I literally remember, I don't know if it was like Kurt Loder, like coming on to MTV and like being like, this is the new buzz or whatever the fuck it was in 1993 and played the first version of your video.
Well, it wouldn't have been Kurt
versions.
Loder, I'll tell you that much. But.
Yeah, I know who the fuck it was. I don't remember. But I remember it being on and literally watching it and going, oh my God, I'll never lie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I remember just going on like in my head, and it was one of the first times in my life that I literally said to myself, this is in my mind, to the point where the only tapes I had bought at this point in my life were Queen's Greatest Hits and Classic Queen, because I'd seen, I think, Wayne's World, and I was like, these guys are amazing. And then like you listen to Bohemian Rhapsody, like these guys have to be pretty fucking good to make this song accurate. This was the first thing I think, and then very shortly thereafter, I think I went and bought like Get a Grip and Appetite for Destruction. But that was like,
thanks,
and then Pearl Jam 10, and that was pretty much it. I just listened to that and Queen nonstop.
Since then, nothing else, right? Nothing new. Yeah.
No, I added Extreme in. That's why I love Nuno. But like, yeah, I have almost nothing else in my heart. But you were a point in my life. That's the thing. There's all these people I've met that are amazing and huge, and like, I don't care. You're at a point like when I was vulnerable and actually things meant something, and I actually listened with the headphones on, looking at the little LED screen on my Discman with the 4-second thing and I would just like read the lyrics, and I remember that even the song wasn't in a demo that made the record, right?
Yeah.
I read that in the liner notes. I remember that from a child. Because that's what you did. You read the fucking liner notes. You're like, oh, that's not the produced song. That's the one they kept from the demo. Wow, that's a sick demo.
Yeah, it was pretty great. Thank you for that, man. It's very kind. I can't believe we beat out Get a Grip and Pearl Jam 10.
Not for long, but for a little bit.
Yeah, for a minute, for 1 second. Yeah.
You're a sign of a 90-minute tape I high-speed dubbed because my dad wouldn't let me dub any tape that I didn't own a copy of because he was a software designer, so he was very much against copyright fraud. Yeah.
That's good.
That's awesome.
You know, you call yourself the reluctant singer because you know you were a drummer that kind of you fell into that gig. What was that transition like for you to put on that singer persona. Was that difficult or was it natural?
It was difficult. I mean, I had certainly, I had some sort of, stage awareness, being in choir. I sang, so I should kind of also go back with this. So I sang in choir from second grade to my senior year because, mainly because when you're grade school and middle school, you have to take those electives. But then in high school, you get to choose which elective you want. And I mean, choir is a perfect choice for me because I'm a young teenage boy with hormones and it's a class full of girls. So, so that's kind of why I was, I was drawn to it, and it worked out very well. So I was in choir, so I had sung and I had experienced, being on stage and singing in a barbershop quartet. My brother Brian, when he was a junior and I was a freshman, we had a quartet together. And so, but to actually step out and be singing my own songs, I started writing lyrics for what's called Uncle Duke at the time, before we became Candlebox, like a day before we were going into the studio to make a record, or to record a demo, I should say. So I've never been like that prolific songwriter that's got books and books and books of lyrics. So for me to become the person that I am, it took years. I was the most uncomfortable lead singer. My back was to the audience for like the first 5 or 6 shows. I would turn around occasionally, but my arms would be closed or my eyes would be closed. I actually, early on when we toured, we played the 930 Club in DC, the original that had the post in the middle. And because I wasn't acclimated to the room, I turned my head at one point and knocked myself out because I hit the post. And,
oh my God.
And so they actually thought I had a concussion and everything. They stopped the show. And so I was that guy. I didn't know what to do. And I just knew that I was singing my own lyrics and I was in an environment that, people wanted to see my band. So yeah, it was awkward. It was probably 1994 during the Metallica tour where I really found my footing as a front man. And then of course Woodstock 94, which happened during the tour we were on with Metallica, made me step up my game a little more because that's 300,000 people. And I needed to make sure that I was reaching every one of them. I knew that the importance of our position at that show and being a part of that was going to be instrumental to our career as a band. So there was always business in the back of my mind as well. But, first and foremost, I just still to this day, I still get stage fright. I still drink far too much before I go on stage because I'm nervous. And it's just one of those things, man. I've never been comfortable in these shoes.
Well, that's really
it's amazing that you said that.
You say that because I was going to say Shannon Larkin. So we met you through Shannon Larkin, our friend, drummer of Godsmack from Ugly Kid Joe, moonlit in Candlebox for a little bit. But the way you described you, yep. And when
with Mikey Doling.
Yep.
With Mikey, our boy,
another friend of the show.
Our boy Mikey Doling, who's probably over in Belgium right now playing in front of like 100,000 people because his band Channel Zero is fucking huge out there, and it's like the whole fucking country. But I was saying something, and I just remember Mikey Doling playing with his band, and I lost. Shannon Larkin was saying, "You're the biggest rock star that he knows." He's like, "Dude, Benny, listen, man. Like the thing I like about Kevin is that he's just a rock star, man. He's just like the biggest rock star. Like if you just get to know him, like Shannon with his fucking hat on, he's like smoking a little. He's like, man, he's like a real rock star. Like, so I love that you're saying that you're like all uncomfortable and all of this. Whereas the biggest rock star I know, which is Shannon Larkin, who's never lived in reality ever, with his turtles and his bonsai trees, which is the greatest thing because he's the nicest guy. He's a friend, but he's never had to live in reality because he's been the greatest drummer since day one. Why do you think he'd say that about you if you were so uncomfortable?
Probably because I don't give a fuck, man. I've never taken this too serious. I've never, of course, I'm grateful and humbled by the success of Candlebox, but I've never taken it so serious that, I felt as though I needed to, be Steven Tyler in order to be a rock star, or be James Hetfield in order to be a rock star, or be Layne Staley or any of those guys. I just do me. I do what I do and I do what I feel. And maybe that's what Shannon picks up on. And I did mention a minute ago that liquid courage is very much a part of my routine. So, as much as I would like to take credit for, being that rock star, it has a lot to do with the whiskey that I put in my belly.
But part of it's a mentality too. And I'm curious, there's obviously some sort of inner security that you have with yourself that you feel okay, not putting too much into it, like investing yourself mentally. So where did that come from, or how did you practice that? And you also referenced, having to kind of make yourself more of a front man. How did you foster that persona? Like, what are some of the things that you did?
Well, it was really learning from, the musicians that we toured with. It was also, I right around my freshman year of high school was when I first found Led Zeppelin. And a friend of mine played their record and I was like, what is this? This is awesome. So of course, you can find, footage of these bands when watching MTV when I was 7, 8, 9 years old when it came out in '84. I knew what a frontman was supposed to do. I'd been to enough concerts, of course, Jello Biafra from Dead Kennedys is one of my favorite frontmen, as is Henry Rollins from Black Flag. But I think what I did was I really pulled from within my soul what I wanted to be perceived as a singer. I'd seen Otis Redding at the Monterey Pop and Jazz Festival. It's one of the greatest performances he's ever had. And I knew that being that connected to what it is that you do is very, very important to getting your point across on stage. When a lot of people ask me now, what should I do as an up and coming band? I'm like, be 100% honest with yourself. Be as sincere as you can with what it is you're creating. And if you're not losing yourself on stage 100% of the time, you're doing a disservice not only to your music, but to yourself and to your fans. And, it's like Eminem sang in that song, you better lose yourself in the music the moment. Because it is that hour and a half to 2 hours that we're on stage every night is the greatest hour and a half to 2 hours of my day. The rest of it is waiting around for that rush. And, if I were a junkie, that would be, waiting for my next score every single day. That's really what it is. And so for me, I just kind of had to allow myself to feel the music the way that it made me feel.
So wait, when you said waiting for the rush, was that like when they were setting up Neil Peart's crazy drum set and they were like going rototom 1, octatom 7, 4th ancillary kick drum. This is the 23. Hold on, give me the D12, D112, and then is that what you mean by like waiting for the rush? Because like I understand, I can understand that, and this is actually something I wanted to ask because you said you toured with Rush, you toured with Metallica, and in particular, and this is where I listen sometimes, you said that when you upped your game was when you were on tour with Metallica, and I've seen Metallica. And let me tell you, they're my favorite band that I've realized it's like when your dad, you find out he's not the smartest guy in the world, but like he still kicks ass. I love Metallica, but like you go see Metallica and like there is something about it like, oh yeah, because he even says to tell people that we don't give a fuck. Was there something like, was that when you like had that moment like where you're like, I just don't care anymore? Because I've seen the Woodstock 94 performance. I've had it on a bootleg that I bought for $25 at Albums that was printed in Germany way back in the day. And you certainly look like you know what you're doing.
Well, we had, again, there was a lot against, there was a lot of negative towards us because we were the youngest band from Seattle. So it was a battle. When we first went on tour the summer of '93, we took a band out called Greta that were from Los Angeles that we were, kind of great friends with. And they weren't label mates, but we liked them. And they had a little bit of like an alternative leaning audience. And we knew that we kind of had to cross what was going at that time for us. The single was Change. We had to kind of cross over into whatever it was called, Alternative Nation, on MTV, it's like 120 minutes or whatever it was. So we chose to go out with a band called Greta. Every single night was a battle for us. There was a lot of negative energy from a lot of the audience because we were playing to people that didn't know us, that maybe were there to see somebody else that was on the bill. There was not a real support for us when it came to media and magazines and stuff like that. So we were, it was the four of us against the world. And so a lot of that, what you see is my frustration with people not taking us for who we were as a band, but thinking, oh, well, this is just another Seattle band and they're riding the coattails of Pearl Jam or Nirvana or whatever it is. And that was difficult to swallow for us. I mean, when we did the Woodstock, another reason that I'm kind of an asshole on that Woodstock 94 is we did the press tent that afternoon. And we were the headliner for Friday night with Violent Femmes. And Collective Soul played before us, and then Live played before Collective Soul. So it was not a great Friday night, but three bands that had, records that were doing very, very well. And then of course the Violent Femmes were just kind of at that point, the college music scene was, so embracing of what they had done and who they were, that it was a good night. But we did the press tent that afternoon, and our label, A&R person introduced us to everybody there. Candlebox is the only band playing Woodstock 94 with a record in the top 10, let alone the top 20 on Billboard charts. They're moving currently 170,000 records a week. They're on Madonna's Maverick Records. They're out on tour currently with Metallica. They've toured recently with Rush. They're about to head over to Europe with Henry Rollins. We'd like to open the floor up to any questions. It was a one fucking question. So jokingly, I said, yes, Mr. Rather in the back. And every single person turned around like Dan Rather was there. And I was like, okay, so you guys are worse than we are being from Seattle because you think Dan Rather is going to ask us questions. Why would Dan Rather be at Woodstock 94? So that was kind of like, I was like, this is bullshit. And we are that band that nobody's going to give a shit about. So we better put on a great show. And I think we did.
Wow. That's
well,
amazing.
You said something really important, and you actually alluded to it, and I was going to be proud of myself for just, again, remembering this because of reading inside labels. But Madonna did the Maverick Records thing, which everyone knows for Alanis Morissette because, Jagged Little Pill changed my life, and I really love her, and she's the greatest, and Canada's awesome, just like Rush. But weren't you guys the first band that kind of kicked ass on that label? And does that mean that Madonna called you guys up and was like, hey, come over to the bondage night with Prince and play for me at my private palace? And
it's such a strange way of asking questions.
No, but how's that happen? Because I know Madonna's a goddamn freak.
Yeah, we were the first band to sign to Maverick. We'd been flown to Los Angeles to play for EMI. And Guy Osiri, who was the A&R guy from Maverick Records at the time, was an intern. But he was trying to get a job there because he wanted to work for Madonna and he wanted to work for Freddie DeMann. Freddie was managing Madonna at the time. He had also managed Michael Jackson. He was managing Lionel Richie. And he started the label with Madonna through Warner Brothers. So Guy's attorney said, listen, there's this young band that's down from Seattle that you should probably go see, that there's a lot of heat on. Sony Records is having him stay an extra couple weeks or a couple nights for the next week. And you should check out the band. So he came to see us play at Club Lingerie in Los Angeles. We didn't meet Madonna until the following, we were on tour with Rush. We were playing Madison Square Garden in New York. So that would have been April. We didn't meet her until April of 94. But we, of course I had spoken to her on the phone. She called when we signed the deal and said, listen, we're really excited and we love your record. And I can't wait to meet you guys. So, but that took about another year and a half before we met her. But she was lovely, man. She's a great label owner. And I think for us, it was so nice to be on a label with Alanis Morissette and the Deftones. It was the three of us. So we were three musketeers and three really great bands that had great success. Too. Yeah.
Firestarter.
Great success.
Twisted Firestarter.
Prodigy wasn't until 99. So, when
I'm
when
just
we
saying,
signed,
in heaven, I love him.
But the crazy thing about Maverick is, Guy passed on Korn. He passed on Limp Bizkit. He passed on POD. He was looking for a specific type of sound that he wanted that label to have once he became kind of the president and head of A&R there. So, but it was a great label. Madonna was awesome. I did have a moment where in 2000 when I was trying to leave the
can we
label where
say
it wasn't going
Muse?
well, but
Because Muse is a really because for me,
sorry,
if there's a
continue your
band,
Ben, hold on.
Ben,
Sorry.
that was a good story.
Yeah,
What'd you do there?
I'm sorry.
no,
was
I
just
mean, but
thinking-
he's right. I mean, what happened was, Muse was a perfect interlude to that because they had released that I think it was called Show Off or what the first Showcase, that first record of theirs. Maverick had signed for a licensing deal in the States, and Candlebox was in Showbiz, and Candlebox was in a bit of a weird space. Pete was dealing with drugs and alcohol to an extent to where the band couldn't tour. That was our guitar player, Pete. And that's right after Shannon had come out on tour with us as a drummer, filling in for Cruisin', who had left. So we were at a crossroads with Maverick Records, and we felt that they had lost their direction because they were moving into this world of bands like Muse, and those were signing deals that when you give Prodigy $4.5 million for one licensing album, but you can't give the band who built your offices the $50,000 for the demos we're supposed to provide, it's bullshit. And so that was kind of the catalyst of that deal with Muse was when I said, I got on the phone with Guy and Madonna. I was like, listen, this is bullshit. And y'all can go fuck yourselves. I want off. So they terminated my contract the next day. And it was because of it wasn't that I didn't like Muse. I just felt as though this is a direction the label was taking that I just didn't feel like Candlebox could be a part of.
Well,
Wow.
but good for you. You're watching Rome burn, dude. And look,
Well,
Muse is a great band that a lot of money was put into this band, but it's money that again helped build something that wasn't you. And you got to go. This is a hard world, man. This is a dog eat dog world, and when you're not being appreciated, that's a hard thing. Well, I love Carol Kay. I watched her fucking documentary, and they turned her away at the record label door. They're like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "Oh my god, I fucking built this place." Like, you know what I mean? Like, so for that to happen to you guys, like, good for you, man. Like, that's something you should be proud of because your band's awesome. Like, you have an album called Wolves, right? That we should all be talking about. Am I crazy?
We can talk about Wolves if you want.
So I was just going to say, we're actually wrapping up this episode, part 1 here.
Oh, should we talk about that in length the next time?
What I want to say is, make sure that everyone goes and checks out the newest Candlebox record, Wolves. And anything else, as we put a little ellipsis in this conversation, that you want people to know about before we take our quick break and fast forward a week?
Ellipsis. I always want to say
those are the 3 dots, guys. It's 3 periods in a row. It's called an ellipsis.
Yeah.
It's the ellipsis of the moon.
Yeah, I mean, no, Wolves is out. It's streaming. It's you can get it anywhere. It's probably the best Candlebox record since the debut, in my opinion. And I think that there's some real magic on that album, and we're very, very proud of it. And just listen to it. I mean. It doesn't. There's so much music. People are so accustomed to Candlebox because of Far Behind and You, and that first album, that they forget that we have 6 other records. And there's a lot of music that we have, and we've been producing it. Every 4 or 5 years we take our time, unfortunately. But it's out there. Just
that's definitely something I want to get into part 2 because there's definitely a very special and unique sound that Candlebox has even over such a long career. So I definitely want to take a dive into that in part 2 and hear more about that process and the writing and everything. But for now, this is the end of part 1 with Kevin Martin on 2020'd 2020-d.com. We will see you next week.
Because we've always been a band that, you don't see us like, it wasn't like an MTV band, we're pretty faceless. That's what's the title of that. And it's because, we fly under the radar, but when people hear, a song, oh, wow, that's Godsmack. Like they know our song, Voodoo or whatever, or I Stand Alone or whatever song, they'll know that, but not the name of the band, because we don't oversaturate. And Sully is really, I wouldn't even say it's his genius that makes it like that. It's just the way he operates and wants to make a different record every time.